Hello, my name is Dhavan Shah. I'm a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I'm the director of the Mass Communication Research Center and research director in the Center for Communication and Civic Renewal. The work I'll share today concerns U.S. presidential debates and various computational approaches that we've been employing at Wisconsin in collaboration with others to explore the role that debates play in our politics. What I'll do is move now to sharing my screen so you can follow along the slides. Fair amount of data to present here, a number of studies I'm going to walk through, and this is really a part of a collaborative research project, and I'll come back towards the end and share the names of many of the people who've been involved in this work. Really, this work is centered, as I said, on U.S. presidential debates. Since 1976, televised debates have been a central feature of every election cycle in the U.S. The first one was 1960 with Nixon Kennedy. That was widely thought to have benefited Kennedy, who understood the aspects of television production and presentation, was more telegenic, was more prepared, wore the appropriate colored suit, wore a little bit of makeup as well, while Nixon really seemed unprepared for the moment. And the question is, how much did the visuals of that particular televised debate play a role? Debates since that time have grown and grown in terms of importance and centrality within election cycles. They're now the focal event that draws 70 to 80 million viewers, second only to the Super Bowl, the most widely seen broadcast event, one that will have just passed by the time you'll be seeing this talk. What's interesting about that Nixon Kennedy debate, as I mentioned, is how it's been reinterpreted after the fact as an indication that appearances are everything, that literally they matter more than the content of the debate. Lang and Lang in 1984 paraphrased Lincoln when discussing that first 1960 debate. The nation did not long remember what they said there, but it did remember how they looked when they said it. Jameson in 1984 goes further. The tragedy of the first debate for Nixon was an aggregation of cues irrelevant to the audience's judgment of him as a potential as a president, biased its appraisal of his performance. The argument can be made that whether or not a candidate perspires under hot studio lights should have no bearing on his possible performance as president. And while that is true, what's interesting is when we've tested this, and this has been done, for example, by Jamie Druckman, who he found among subjects who had no knowledge of the 1960 debate, and this was done among students at a university who I imagine were a little more cloistered in terms of their understanding of politics, that watching versus listening actually affected debate evaluations of that 1960 debate. When they watched it, it increased individuals' reliance on personality perceptions. And when you look at research by Ball and Eric Busey, Eric is one of my collaborators on much of this research, they find Nixon's nonverbals were far less visually appealing than Kennedy's. He was more aggressive, more anger and threat displays, more inappropriateless, putting handkerchiefs up to his face, more stress and higher blink rate, and even more of an evasive and downcast gaze as if he was uncomfortable on the screen. So what has this brought to us is a really old debate about debates, which is how much of these visual factors in candidate appearance matter in the debate context, and is it more important than how candidates sound or what they say? Is it really about how they appear? And so the question that kind of guides the beginning of this research, and this research trajectory began over a dozen years ago, is do audiences send more to candidate visuals and behaviors than the political arguments that are supposed to be the central deliberative platform of presidential debates? And what's interesting is there's a fair amount of parallel research that suggests that there's a lot of construction and performance of contentiousness in our contemporary politics. Debates are thought to inform voters' choices of candidates more now, and there's more evidence of subtle influences in terms of the way that they inform them, shape their knowledge perceptions, limited persuasive effects. But really, what we've seen much more evidence of is that they're becoming a blame game, constructed as highly contentious activities, increasingly theatrical and performative, and even the production values used in debates seem to emphasize those nonverbal reactions and expressions. And Diana Mutz has written about this. Myself, with colleagues like Jeho Cho, have written about this, that the use of split screens to emphasize those nonverbal reactions, which are highlighted in contemporary debates, really create what's called in-your-face politics, which increases interest but erodes a sense of trust and confidence in what we're seeing, because it really reduces politics to this kind of contentious exchange, this game among politicians, rather than a discussion of ideas. So one way that we came up with to gauge whether or not that old debate had current parallels was to look at the response to debates, and specifically debate moments, in social media. And so really this is, how does that first screen, television, the experience of that and seeing how candidates are behaving, shape viewers' responses on the second screen, on laptops, on tablets, on smartphones, what's often been termed second screening or dual screening. And many people, and many of us, oftentimes have more than one screen open. We have our television going while we're on our phone, while we're on our laptop or tablet. What's interesting about this is the question then is, what spurs a response to debate performance on social media? Moment by moment, is it what the candidate's saying? Is it how they're saying it, their tone of voice? Or is it how they appear? Back to that old question. And what we believe this lets us do through a computational approach is allow testing of biobehavioral theories of media response by looking at social media as a kind of seismograph of what we're picking up generally from across the population. And we did this not with the Nixon-Kennedy debates, but instead began with the Romney-Obama debates. And so this was 2012, and here's what we did. We had the 90-minute debate, and we divided it into 170 to 180 codable segments. Each one was 30 seconds in duration. A few were a little bit shorter because of breaks. And here, the rhetorical elements of the debate were coded using Benoit's functional categories, and then we also coded for memes. These are things like attacks, contrast statements, responses, personal narratives, intentional and unintentional high-intensity moments that often became mimetic. And then also key nonverbal elements were identified and coded. Tone of voice, was it positive or negative? Displays of emotion, happiness and a sense of reassurance versus anger and threat. And then gesture valence, affinity gestures like having your hands open versus defiance gestures like pointing at someone or making a fist. And then even blink rate, both the mean and standard deviation to look at variation, but also to look at moments of high blink rate suggesting nervousness. And we paired this with Twitter harvesting and coding. We drew on a garden hose. This is 10% of global Twitter, which is about 400 million tweets a day at the time. Twitter, now X, fluctuates over time. It rose to higher than that and now has declined from that. We have an archive at Wisconsin that we collected from 2012 through 2015, containing about 60 billion tweets. And this is about, again, since it's a 10% sample, it's about 40 to 50 million tweets per day during that 3-year plus period. And this was accessed through the Twitter streaming API with permission. We used Hadoop and Hive as a storage and warehousing system at the Computer Systems Lab at Wisconsin for managing and querying this very large distributed data set. And the first paper that we did off of this of any note really is in this special issue of the American Behavioral Scientist. And what we found in this was that the social media response for Romney and Obama, which we used doing multiple statistical tests of time series analysis, that the rhetorical features in meme generation, they predicted some of the variance in the volume of online expression, about 4 of 8 tests, predicted variance in about 2 of 8 tests, really it was attacks and those memes. It was, memorable utterances, typically attacks at the others, or unintentionally humorous moments. If you recall things like Romney mentioning Big Bird, for example. Um, and then tonal elements, the kind of vocal manner and pitch, and this again controlling for the verbals. Only in about 3 of 8 tests did it affect the overall volume, and in only 1 of 8 tests did it affect the sentiment. Again, mainly tones of anger and frustration generated any kind of response in terms of volume. And then the visual tests, we found a little bit more robust findings, really 4 of 8 tests for volume, 3 of 8 tests for sentiment. Again, mainly angry and threatening expressions and blink rate seem to matter the most. Though, again, here we're seeing visuals do seem to matter more, though some of those rhetorical and mimetic moments also seem to have some traction. And what we really noticed across this was the combined power of aggression. The candidates' aggressive verbal and nonverbal features shape the volume and valence of expression on Twitter. So if you look across what mattered for the verbal, what mattered for the tonal, and what mattered for the visual, you come to see that all of them mattered, and they kind of work in combination, and we process and respond to media content in all likelihood when all of these elements coincide and reinforce one another. And that aggression in debates is made up of complementary, not competing elements that may be a really key to understanding that social media response. That it's not just how candidates appear, but their ability to demonstrate aggression, power, perform leadership, or at least our modern notion of it, within the context of debate. Not necessarily about making strong points or a deliberative moment, but again, what might be called performing the presidency. And so, what we thought we needed to do was to code and consider them as such, to think of them in combination. And really, as we were doing this work, what happened was we saw the rise of populist rhetoric. And rhetoric as a style that we could see on the political left and on the political right. Maduro on the left, for example, someone like Trump or Berlusconi on the right. And you see that overall, in terms of vote share of populists, they were gaining ground, but there was also a certain linguistic and verbal and performative style to populist leadership as well that we were noting. And what we were noting was there was this aggressive, kind of transgressive debate style that we wanted to capture, what we thought was the marker of both coinciding with what we saw in our previous work with aggression in debates and what we saw emerging in terms of politics. In terms of visual and tonal features, these are things like anger and threat displays, just frowning, fixed stares, negative, rigid facial expressions, really creating a feeling of hostility. Defiance gestures, things like a raised fist or shaking hand, pointing at your opponent. Um, Nonverbal disagreement, head shaking and finger wagging. And then inappropriate displays, including nonverbal behavior that is incompatible with the message and tone, distracting behaviors, basically not abiding by the norms of such a kind of sanctified event. And then maybe most notable, especially during the Trump versus Clinton political debates, things like hostile interruptions, disrupt, over, talk over, or interject as the partner in the debate is speaking. But there's also tonal and verbal features that matter here as well. Verbal non-fluencies, including broken phrases, incomplete sentences, repeated words. All these kind of, again, create a folkiness or a kind of normalness, kind of, again, part of that populist style. Character attacks, including personal put-downs and assertions about the opponent's character or their policy, not necessarily their policies, but really about them as a person, I'm sorry. And then also angry and threatening tone when the speaker's voice tone has a menacing, accusatory, or hostile feel, revealing a desire to fight or do political battle. Angry language, and this was coded using the linguistic inquiry word count program by Jamie Pennebaker. And that was just, looking at the amount of angry language or anger in the language, I should say. And then blame language, again, coded from Diction. That's Rod Hart's program out of also Texas, Austin. And there we use the diction scores for blame. And then also nonverbal sophistication, right? Which is indexed by percentage of 6-letter words or more. The more of those you use, the more verbally sophisticated you are. So a lack of that being a kind of more simplistic, more basic style, seen as more populist, more transgressive. Um, for this, again, as I mentioned, Clinton-Trump, we used the 2016 debates. Again, we had 90-minute debate, but here we divided it into smaller 10-second increments, down from 30. And then again, we did a 10% double coding for reliability and had high rates of reliability in our coding about these debate segments in terms of their features. We did Twitter harvesting and coding this time rather than doing a 10% sample. We purchased the data from GNIP, all tweets during the debate mentioning Clinton or Trump, 5 million plus tweets during the first debate, 3 million plus during the third debate. The second debate, which was town hall, we did not use because it was more of a not a split screen format where we could monitor both candidates at all times. Again, volume of mentions, tweets only mentioning Trump or tweets only mentioning Clinton. Who was getting the attention? What were they doing that was drawing attention and interest? First, just note the massive difference in behavior by Trump and Clinton. Just coding those basic elements in terms of anger or threat facial expressions or defiance gestures or an angry and threatening tone are just off the charts for Trump compared to Clinton. And if you look at this in terms of even comparing Trump to previous male candidates, Republican or Democrat, he's off the chart for all of these elements as well, for anger and threat, for anger and threat, both in terms of facial displays and tonal elements, and also for things like fear and evasion, defiance gestures. Really, really highly, performative candidate in the form of Trump. What's also notable is how much the volume of intensity of activity varies during the debate in terms of certainly it starts slowly and peaks as the debate progresses, but once it gets going, you see tremendous variability, in the amount of conversation a candidate is generating at any given point in time, and a somewhat hydraulic effect, right? When you're talking about one candidate, you're probably not talking about the other because this candidate is dominating the screen at that time. What we found when we created an index of Trump and Clinton's kind of populism index or transgressive behavior index, controlling for the others mentions because of that hydraulic feature, what we found was, and you'll note this here, Trump's visuals in particular drove the response at 10, 20, 30, 40 seconds. Incredibly strong in terms of its power and immediacy. Some of that tonal and very little of the verbal. In terms of Clinton, it really isn't very much the visuals that matter. It's some of the tonal that matters, and then further out, and also the verbal that matters, and then much further out. And so again, we see this kind of aggressive, populist visual and verbal style driving the Twitter response. The Twitter using public, and I don't want to say that this is a cross section of public opinion. This is, again, a form of expressive opinion, the people who are willing to share their views in real time in those moments. That particular subset of the public is highly reacted to Trump's visually aggressive style. Response to aggressive nonverbal behaviors at almost every time lag tested. They're less responsive to Clinton's verbal efforts at a populist assertions in terms of arguments and rhetorical tactics take longer to draw a response, and they seem to resonate less. This piece, again, is published in New Media and Society. So one of the things you'll see here, and I haven't spent a lot of time getting into the details of how we do our computational work, because I'm not sure as to whether that would be of interest to everyone in the audience. But I will say that in terms of computational methods for visual politics, one of the ways that we're trying to innovate is not just on the, harvesting Twitter data or looking at large scale data and looking at, say, contours of data over time or these kinds of time series models. but also, that we have computational tools for understanding visual aspects of media and politics. Social media reflects public sentiments expressions, but it's not mass opinion. And oftentimes, if we can merge these computational and conventional methods through data integration in the science of team science, we can gain these powerful new insights. And so, really, what I want to spend the second half of my talk talking about is a much more computational turn that we've moved towards as we've tried to expand our research and to scale it upward. Because the really most challenging and time dependent part of this is the hand manual coding of those visual elements of candidates' behavior, their tone, and then obviously what they're saying. And so to kind of expand and increase the precision of our work, we wanted to code at a finer grain level of analysis, ideally down to the second. We wanted to automate coding of political nonverbals to enable moment by moment time series analysis. So being able to look at a much more granular fashion and to develop more nuanced machine learning techniques to parse tweets and features, to look at other social media content, for example, even things like search behavior. And to do this, if we can do this, we can consider political events and settings beyond debates, but certainly the first place we want to adapt it is debates themselves. And so what we realized is we needed a deep learning approach. And this was, as our prior work demonstrated, we knew visuals mattered. We needed a computer system, a computerized system, I should say, that could account for the range of verbal, tonal, and visual features. We needed a text stream that we could code using computational tools, an audio stream we could code using computational tools, and a video stream we could code using computational tools. And then we realized they must be considered in relation to each other when using this deep learning, machine learning approach. And to do that, we adapted a deep canonical correlational analysis approach, specifically an interaction canonical correlational network. And the piece that is the kind of groundwork for our more specific testing of this in the debate setting was published by a doctoral student at Wisconsin. I served on Zongkai's committee, Zongkai's son, who now works for Amazon. Really what this is doing, it's a multimodal language analysis and machine learning. It's taking data, which is, trying to extract features and modal alignment using algorithms for both supervised and unsupervised learning to get to some end task, sentiment or emotional analysis, behavior detection. And to do this really is a little more complicated than that. What we have really is a raw acoustic sequence, a raw visual sequence. We're processing those using, again, various processing systems and models. And then we have this textual set of features that we're treating as an embedded correlation, right? A hidden correlation. So this acoustic and textual outer product and the visual and textual outer product both are considered. And then there's the canonical correlation analysis between the two, which is what's being used to create our multimodal feature extraction. This is all done computationally. So what we're doing is essentially using the visual features and looking for certain kinds of expressions. In this case, a board expression coupled with what the person is saying. I just finished watching this new movie, and if you look at the tone, what you can actually hear them say is they didn't just say it the way I just said it. They said, I just finished watching this new movie. And that lower voice at the end, coupled with the bored expression, denotes something negative. So it's all three of those features together. Evaluating the movie negatively is partly because of the lower voice, partly because of the bored expression coming together to indicate that. That's what machine learning that combines video, audio, and text can do. It's essentially a multimodal system for automated coding of these very features that we've been coding manually. Now, we can do that same thing during presidential debates. We can look at a candidate's facial expression for angry and threatening displays or happy and reassuring displays. We can look at the audio signal. Is their tone of voice clipped or not? And we can look at the transcript of what they say. And that essentially is the features of those different streams that we use in our interaction canonical correlational network analysis. So first task we set ourselves to do was really tracking aggression over time. Was there an increase in incivility, that we've seen in recent political debates, gradual, or was it something that has really been erupting more recently because of the rise of this populist style coupled with candidates and politicians like Trump in the US, but certainly populist candidates throughout the world? And what we found here, and again, note, this is the trend line. We have one kind of higher pitched moment here. This is in 1984 when it's Ronald Reagan and Walter Mondale, a very theatrical president himself in the case of Ronald Reagan. And then you see this just off the charts when it comes to Donald Trump with Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump with Joe Biden. For this debate, we coded every segment. For the other debates, we coded a sample of the segments, but the pattern is consistent and extremely high in the last two US presidential election cycles. What we coded for, again, was facial aggressiveness and kind of, again, angry and threatening tone. These are features. Tonal aggressiveness, angry and threatening voice tone. These are the characteristics. And then verbal aggressiveness in terms of particular statements about the opponent. When you look at that, you see just how much of a rise in those characteristics has occurred over the 40-year period that we're looking at here. What's also notable is we were able to do this using out-of-the-box open source systems. So for our textual features, we used a pre-trained BERT lowercase model. Again, all these details are contained in the paper that I'll share the title at the end. For acoustic features, we used Torch Audio 2. And for the facial features, we used OpenFace. And again, all of these are available. These could be applied, and we're deeply interested in expanding this work to include other countries. In fact, right now, we're applying this to Latin American debates and adjusting the textual layer to be a Spanish language model rather than an English language model. What we did first and foremost was take our basic multimodal model based on those features, but really had to see if a segment was pre-2016 or post-2016 in terms of being able to do the aggressiveness prediction. Given how dramatically Trump changed the rules of politics, it's only when we split into this two-step process rather than a one-step process that we see a marked improvement in model performance. Why? Because, again, Trump changed how people behave during debates. And in fact, if you look at Hillary Clinton's behavior in the second of the two debates they had that were in the traditional style, she upped her aggressiveness to try to match Trump's. What you'll note here is if you look at the full period or even compare just the prior to the late, the two-step model in terms of precision and recall performs better than the one-step model by far. And the F1 overall for the two-step is quite good, especially in the 2016 and 2020 period, but also overall. What's also notable is if we break it down by text, audio, video versus the multimodal, it's the multimodal model that combines all the features that performs best overall. So what do we have and what can we take away from this? Well, for starters, what we're trying to do with this ICCN model is build an automated multimodal classifier of aggressive political style. What does this let us do? It lets us consider technically the hidden correlation between text-based audio and text-based video, which improves the performance of our classifier. And it responds to what we've seen theoretically, which is aggression is a combination of those characteristics. We realize we need a two-step model building strategy. It recognizes the abrupt shift in the patterns of aggression in 2016 and 2020 in American politics. We believe this is part of a larger global trend, not necessarily even originating in the US, but towards a more populist style of politics. And this is going to allow us to analyze debates at different levels, state and local, and across national context. So we can examine whether rising aggression is limited to the US presidential debates or widespread. As I said already, our hypothesis is that this is more widespread. So we're also expanding this to consider the information conveyed by hostile gestures, interruptions, and blink rate. Right now, we focused on facial expressions. We're also connecting this to automated coding, to language used when posting about the candidates on social media. When candidates show aggression during debates, do their supporters denigrate opponents online? Are they mirroring that aggression? Are they using derogatory language to speak about the opposing candidate when the candidate essentially gives them permission to through their own actions or words? And does aggressive political performances provoke stronger responses from conservatives or liberals? These are questions we want to ask and answer. This piece outlining the ICCN multimodal classifier appeared just very recently in Communication Methods and Measures. And so one of the things that I'll urge you to take away from this is that sources of social media data have expanded considerably, though some require subscriptions now, but they give us a now possible to track moment by moment expression and behaviors across a range of platforms. We use tools like Synthesio and Infigi Atlas and other R and Python scrapers to gather data. We also use CrowdTangle for, say, Facebook and Instagram data. And those allow us to look at, in a very granular way, how the socially active members of the public are responding to debates in real time. As I also said, this is not just my work, but the work of many people, and I alluded to the importance of the science of team science. The most recent work we've done, again, Zongkai's son is a essential partner in this. Eric Busey has been very involved at various stages. Bill Satharis is Zongkai's major professor. But then also scholars like Josephine Lucido at Texas, Prathusha Sharma, who's at Apple now, Jordan Foley, who is currently at Washington State. And then again, if you look across this line of research, you'll also see John Peavyhouse and Chris Wells as regular participants in this work in the past. John is the chair of our political science department, and Chris Wells is a professor at Boston University. This is, again, what I've tried to share with you is a fairly large body of research, sharing certain highlights. Happy to talk about with them more. Please feel free to contact me. And again, thank you so much for the attention. If you'd like to find any of these projects, you can find them on my website, which is listed here at the bottom. You can also certainly email me or message me on X or Threads, and I'll certainly respond there. Again, thank you so much for this opportunity, and appreciate you taking the time.